Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, children, and welcome on behalf of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, the community of Cape Town, South Africa, to another one of our peace symposiums. We're very pleased that you've come. And to start our program this afternoon, before we do the other introductions, we normally start our program with the recitation of the Holy Quran. And I'll ask our brother, Mr. Ridwan, to come and recite to us a few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن يرغب عن ملة إبراهيم إلا من سفه نفسه ولقد اصطفيناه في الدنيا وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين إذ قال له ربه أسلم قال أسلمت لرب العالمين ووصى بها إبراهيم بنيه يعقوب يا بني إن الله اصطفى لكم الدين فلا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أم كنتم شهداء إذ حضر يعقوب الموت إذ قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي قالوا نعبد إلهك وإله آبائك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون وقالوا كونوا هودا أو نصارى تهتدوا قل بل ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين قولوا آمنا بالله والأسباط وما أوتي موسى وعيسى وما أوتي النبيون من ربهم لا نفرق بين أحد منهم ونحن له مسلمون. الحمد لله.
Everyone, for the repetition of the verses of the Quran. The translation of these verses will be read by Shaheen Akunsa.
The translation is taken from the second chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, from verses 131 to 136. And who will turn away from the religion of Abraham, but he makes a fool of himself. Him did we choose in this world, and in the next he will surely be among the righteous. When his Lord said to him, "Submit," he said, "I have already submitted to the Lord of the worlds." The same did Abraham enjoin upon his sons, and Jacob also, saying, "O my sons, truly Allah has chosen this religion for you. So let not death overtake you, except when you are in a state of complete submission." Were you present when death came to Jacob, when he said to his sons, "What will you worship after me?" They answered, "We will worship thy God, the God of thy fathers, Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, the one God, and to him we submit ourselves. Those are a people that have passed away. For them is that which they earn, and for you is what you earn, and you shall not be questioned as to what they did." And they say, "Be ye Jews or Christians, then you will be rightly guided." Say, "Nay, but follow ye the religion of Abraham, who was ever inclined to Allah. He was not of those who associate gods with Allah." Say ye, "We believe in Allah and what has been revealed to us, and what was revealed to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and his children, and what was given to Moses and Jesus, and what was given to all other prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and to him we submit ourselves."
Translation of these verses in the Quran. Once again, I'd like to welcome everybody to our peace symposium. I see we have our speakers from various religions who will come and address us today, and a particular welcome to them. And for those of you who have been to our peace symposiums before, perhaps what makes this symposium different today than the others that you know is that it incorporates the function that our community holds known as a religious founders day, which is an idea that was started by the second caliph of our community in the late 1920s. When there was uprisings in India at the time, there were settlements between Hindus and Muslims that had reached riotous and hateful levels. These groups couldn't stand one another. And they were nationalist Hindu groups inciting hatred against Muslims and vice versa. And what particularly stood out during that time was a book that was published, Among the Arsenal of Hate, that was being spread around at the time was a book published called Ringale Rasul, which was the colorful prophet, in which the Hindu nationalists were trying to point at all kinds of stories about the Prophet of Islam. And naturally this incited hatred, and hatred begins for hatred. And there were cross killings, fightings, and the community's leader at the time, Hazrat Mirza Bashir ibn Mahmud, decided that, you know, what we should do to quell this hatred that's boiling at the time. And it's part of the Hindu Shuddhi, or Shuddhi movement, which was the an ethnic type of cleansing in a way. Was instead of, you know, repelling hatred with hatred, why don't we try and develop love between religions? Why don't we, by developing a sense of respect for one another, let's each of us call our people together. Let's call Hindus and let them speak about, for example, a Muslim, the Muslim leaders, the Muslim founder. Why don't the Muslims come forward and speak about the Hindu founder? Why doesn't the Jew come forward and speak about the Christian founder, and so forth? Attempting to foster love and to quell the conflict burning up. And that was the idea, and it has taken up a bit. We celebrate this amongst all our communities over the world, and this is the idea that we haven't had one such as this before, the religious fast, and this is what we hope to do here. But as a start, I'm told by the organizers that we won't start perhaps with telling or asking people to come and speak about another religion first. Perhaps that could be something in the future. But today, I believe we'll be starting with the people from the various religions speaking about their religious founders firstly themselves. So, with that in mind, we have a number of speakers, about 6 or 7 of them, we can welcome in. Your time will be coming over for you up, and before we get to that, I would like to call on Mr. Mansoor Ahmadzai, the National President, to deliver the opening address.
In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, I want to salute all of you with the Islamic salutation of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and blessings of God be upon all of us. Today is a great day that we all gather here to talk about the holy founders of different religions. In fact, this is a very important issue in the sense that the world is already divided in different ways. When we talk about the religion, there are problems among the same religion peoples. There are problems among the one religion to another religion. But if we come close to each other and start listening about the holy founders of the other religion, that can first of all give us an idea about that religion and the holy founder. The one who came and he did a lot for the mankind, for the humanity. And this way we can come close, we can reduce the gaps. And it's not only within one religion, it is the need to sit other religions also. That's why this thing which we are doing this program, it is being done in a different part of the world among our community. But we decided to start from this year, and I'm very happy and glad to see all of you here to join with us to share the good work which was done by those religious leaders, though they are not with us, but their legacy, their work is still with us. talking about the verses which are kept in front of you, there are many issues, but the main focal point is that Allah the Almighty sent the prophets, the guides, the warners, time to time in different parts of the world. Generally, Holy Quran talk about Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and people those who were from the children of Israelites. Why? Because they were from the Arabs. But Holy Quran did recognize the other part of the world, that it is not only that this blessings was only found in the Abrahamic lineage, but it was also given to the other religions. For example, if I quote from the Holy Quran, that is chapter 30, verse 8, وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ, and there is a guide for every people. The second quote is chapter 10, verse 48, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٍ, and for every people there is a messenger. Then the third quote is وَإِن مِّن أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ, and there is no people to whom a warner has not been sent. So according to the Islamic terminology, Hadi or Nazir or Bashir or Rasul or Nabi, they are all those they came to lead their community. So there is no part of the world, whether is still known to us or not. They got guides, they got leaders, those they were divinely guided by God. So in this way, the message is one. And the message is that we should recognize each other, and if we recognize each other and we respect the holy founders of all the religions, then we can come close. The gaps which we have between one religion to another religion can also reduce. And Muslims are bounded by the Holy Quran that they should best respect all the past prophets, wherever they came. So this way, this is a very valid focal point, that from the Muslims there is no any problem with any religion, except some people they have their own way of thinking, but Quran does not allow that we should disrespect any religion or we should disrespect the founder of the any religion. Those religions which are already established in this world and they have impact in this world through their teachings, through their work, and they are recognized by the people. As a Muslim, it is our duty to respect them, to believe on them, and we are bounded to follow their principal teachings which are according to the Holy Quran. So if we can understand what Holy Quran is telling us, then we can reduce those things, we can come close to each other, and I think that is the need of the time, that because people, they are using a religion as a tool to divide the people. Meanwhile, the religion should not be the source of division. The religion should be rather a source of bringing people close to each other. If all the right religion, the true religions are from one God, then it means the source is one. And if the source is one, then there should be a common teachings. So if we want that there should be a peace in this world, within our society, then we should focus on a common teaching, on a common ground. All the religions should work not only within themselves, with other religions on a common ground, and if we work this way, then there will be a peace and there will be a respect for others, and that, I think that is the need of the time. That's why we have invited you to share your vision also with us. Thank you for listening.
Jazakallah. Thank you, President Said. Now, we will be starting with a number of the speakers I invited guests today to be speaking on, who will be presenting the various phases and traditions. And the first among them is Mr. Nick Patton, who I see today represents Taoism, which is fascinating. Looking forward to hearing from him. You may also ask the speakers, just perhaps spend a minute of introducing and making themselves known to those who were not there. Can you guys please a minute or two of introduction?
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here as always. I am standing in front of you supposedly as a Taoist. This might be confusing to you, so I will introduce myself to say that my religious background is predominantly Christian. And in recent years, recent decades, my understanding of what it is to be spiritual, to be religious, has expanded tremendously. Thus, I find myself frequenting this Jamaat fairly often, and it's become part of my normal life to be amongst you and to develop our relationships. About 6, 7, 8 years ago, I read a book called the Tao Te Ching, which means the way and its power, the classic of the way and its power, written in China, written down in China about 500 years BC. And the book captivated me in a way that the Bible had captivated me as well. And so I just had to follow that captivation. So I cannot stand in front of you representing a community. I don't. I represent myself. I represent various aspects of community, but I do not represent a Taoist community. I've searched for one in Cape Town, and there are a few people who uphold the Tao as a core text who I've met, but I've not managed to establish ongoing relationship. But that's okay, because it's very interesting. We are talking about Religious Founders Day, to think about the relationship between a founder and a text and a tradition. So I've responded to the teachings of the Tao by following essentially a book, which is actually contrary to Taoism, to make a book be your reality. So the books that we hold dear, the books that we hold sacred, are all really helpful, but ultimately reality goes beyond written language. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned. So the perspectives I've gained by embracing a tradition quite outside of my background have been amazing. It's like having two eyes. Because I thought in Christian terms for three or four decades, and then suddenly when I dived into what was being offered to me out of the Chinese tradition, it's like things came into focus. So that's my only authority is my own journey. I cannot say I represent everybody. I'd like to quote the opening verse of the Tao Te Ching. Dao ko Dao Fei Chang Dao, Ming ko Ming Fei Chang Ming. The translation is, a way that can be walked is not the way. A name that can be named is not the name. That paradigm runs throughout the Taoist writings and throughout the Taoist worldview. That if you literally, physically can walk the way, that is only a shadow of what the real way means. So, my interest here, and what I present to you today, is not an outer, it's not a type of clothing, it's not a language, it's just an inner exploration. I'm not really going to present anything academic, but more devotional. I found that I've developed a devotion to some of these ideas and actually implementing them in my own life. It's not institutional, but it's personal. And in fact, it's not really an ism at all. As I said before, every ism is a wasm, which means that as soon as you institutionalize something, to say Taoism, you've lost it already, because it can never be reduced to an ism. Ism are human ways of putting ideas into words and concepts, writing them down, and thinking we know what we're talking about when we subscribe to our isms. The one Taoist community I touched on in Cape Town said a very interesting thing to me. They said, don't confuse temple Taoism and house Taoism. So don't think that you are finding the core teachings by going to a temple, because it must be lived in the home. Now, the founder, if you like, is a very, it's a question that has dogged people. It's generally agreed among scholars that Lao Tzu, the supposed author of the Tao Te Ching, was a mythical figure, and that the book itself is a compilation of many authors. So when we speak about founders, I just want to reflect briefly here that what we're really looking for is the source of the inspiration of our traditions. Because when someone has a profound revelation and gains a following and then creates a tradition, or a tradition is created, that takes on a life of its own. So, I wouldn't want to overemphasize Lao Tzu or any of the other great Taoist sages like Zhuangzi as well. I wouldn't want to overemphasize the role of the people. I would rather want to keep us coming back to the text, but there's a place for all of it. There's a place for the founder, there's a place for the text, and there's a place for the tradition. We need to take all of that into account if we're going to fully explore any religious tradition. So, just to give you a couple of background facts, in fact, I'd like you to stop there at 15 minutes, okay? Because what I want to challenge you today, let me first say, I congratulate you for holding interfaith dialogue, because not many people are doing it, and it's part of your tradition, which is fantastic. So keep it up. I know that you've been doing it a long time, but don't stop, because I'm not seeing a lot of it. I was talking to Cecil earlier, and we agreed that we don't see a lot of it happening. So it's a very special thing to be able to have faith talk to each other. What I'm challenging you with is, at 15 minutes, I'm going to ask you, anyone here, but especially this Jamaat, to ask me a question. Then we'll have some dialogue going, right? Wherever I am, it doesn't matter. But if we can have some sort of connection between where you are, where I'm at, and where each other is, that will be fantastic. So at 15 minutes, who of you will take the risk and say, I will ask a question even though I don't know what it is yet? Thank you. Thank you. We've got 2 questions. Fantastic. All right. So the main texts of the Taoist tradition are, as I said, the Tao Te Ching, spelled either D-A-O or T-A-O, T-E-C-H-I-N-G. Tao means way, Te means virtue, and Jing is a classic. So it's the classic of the way and its virtue, or the way and its power. The second book is, the second, I'd say, major book in the Taoist tradition is Chuang Tzu, or spelled sometimes with a Z and sometimes with a C. Now, I also want to, since we're bringing in this viewpoint from China, from ancient China, I also want to mention that the other text that's very important is the Yi Ching, which is I-C-H-I-N-G. That is the classic of change, and that's more of a divinatory book. And the other person that must be mentioned is Confucius. Confucius and Lao Tzu were supposed near contemporaries, Lao Tzu being slightly older than Confucius, and there are some very interesting dialogues in the Chuang Tzu between Lao Tzu and Confucius, where their respective positions are pitted against each other, where there's debate and solid discussion. In a nutshell, Confucianism, these traditions continue, I'd say, from a Chinese point of view. You've obviously got Buddhism, you've got communism as well. So you've probably got four, and now state of capitalism. So we've got 4 or 5 major ideologies in the Chinese world: Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, or Zen, communism, and capitalism. And I think there's some of all religions there. I know there are Muslims in China as well, and I know that's a political potato as well. I don't know much about it. So let me just briefly, in the name of the founder, tell you the tale or the story of Lao Guan Di, which is where Lao Tzu, who was a civil servant, was retiring. And I'm quoting from one of my texts here. Sorry, it's not the right place. Getting slightly complicated here, so I will just tell you the story. As he was retiring from life, from his job, he moved westward. West was considered to be the wilderness in the east. So he moved away from the centers of civilization, and he came to the gate of the kingdom. And the gatekeeper recognized him. He said, "Lao Tzu, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm retiring and I'm disappearing. I'm going to my rest." And he said, "Please don't leave without writing down your teachings." And apparently that's when he wrote them down in a small book of only 81 verses. And then he disappeared. So that's how religion has it. Now, as I was saying about the relationship between the founders of religion and the continuing religion, I'd just like to make this note here. As invariably happens, centuries after these living masters, whoever they were, Taoism became formalized and degenerated into religious ritual and superstition. The great sages, such as Lao Tzu, became treated like celestial gods, to be worshipped and petitioned with prayers. Taoists began to practice complex spiritual disciplines that promised magical powers, longevity, or even immortality. This had little to do with the Taoism of the ancient masters. So, one of the insights that the Tao Te Ching brings us is the way that original inspiration gets degenerated through time. And that's not really a judgment. That's more of just an observation of how the original message gets corrupted. Purely by the fact that the evolutionary process continues. And Muslims will know that all kinds of things happen after the revelation that you probably would prefer not to have happened. The Shia-Sunni split today comes from shortly after the revelation, when certain things were put into place that were corruptions already of the ideals of the Prophet. So I would like to read you something from the Tao in this respect. I mean, there is so much to say that it's impossible in 15 minutes. But I can just throw out a few tasters. I'm not really going to capture it for you, but I'm just going to throw a few things and hopefully your imagination will be sparked. So, verse 38, and this is just going to be a sample of the type of thinking, the type of poetry that is in the Tao Te Ching. And this is what it says: when Tao, the way, the great way, is lost, one must learn the rules of virtue. When virtue is lost, the rules of kindness. When kindness is lost, the rules of justice. When justice is lost, the rules of conduct. When the high-blown rules of conduct are not followed, people are seized by the arm and it is forced on them. So you see, it starts with the Tao, becomes virtue, becomes kindness, becomes justice, and then becomes tyranny. So that's I call a devolution of the original message or the original vision of the founder of a tradition. Of course, this talks about not just the founder of a religion, but Tao itself is the great way of the universe. It is the way that we can all partake of freely. We can be in this river of life, this river of the cosmos. And that is one of the really important things about the Taoist revelation, is the fact that nature is seen as good. Unlike in many aspects of monotheism see nature as corrupt and fallen. Especially in the Christian world, post-Augustine, we've seen sin to be original and in the heart of man and in the heart of the cosmos. Not so with the Taoists. The creation is seen to be good. So Genesis 1 is more important than Genesis 2, if you like, or Genesis 3, where sin entered. But Genesis 1, the message of Genesis 1 is that it was good. So the understanding of nature in the Taoist tradition is that it is goodness at its heart. How are we doing? I'm on my 15 minutes.
Is anybody that would like to pose a question? Right now, just ask me.
Yes, you can.
Taoism, can it then be described as a journey of discovery?
That's a very good way of putting it, I think. In my understanding, definitely. Yes. It's not a final thing. It's an invitation to an ongoing journey. Yes.
I wanted to ask you, Taoism isn't actually a religion that takes the way of that there is a God that exists, only a way that you follow. The same as Buddhism is also a way that you follow. But in order for you to get that, you have to get your revelation from somewhere. You know, that whoever the person was, like Lucy, that was a Lao, he must have got some revelation from some entity, I would say. So do you think that is, it can be that he might have got a revelation that told him, yeah, this is the way that you should go, because all the reasons teaches man that they must live a good life.
I agree. It's an interesting question, and it's one that I'd like to, I hope I answer it, but I'd like to say something about monotheism and personal God. Because one of the things that the monotheist mind wants to do is to personalize the Supreme. In Taoism, there is no such inclination to, it acknowledges the Supreme, it calls it Tao, for want of a better word. But it does not make, Tao is not a person. You cannot translate into the monotheist world the word Tao to say God. Because God is it's a German word, but we use it to represent the ultimate being. So these are just some of the factors that need to be taken into account when we're doing this interfaith inquiry. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I can't, in fact, I cannot really answer where it comes from. It's much more apparent in the Islamic accounts and the Christian account and the Jewish accounts how revelations happen. It's not so apparent in the other.
I was watching Buddha, the whole story of Buddha's anyway you get it on some program, it's the whole story of Buddha. And Buddha was seeking his something, you know what I mean? And he was sitting and there he was meditating and so on. But what he at first thought was his nirvana wasn't that. Then all of a sudden it just came to him. And so somehow or other there is some inspiration, whatever it is, but it brings that sort of revelation to you.
Yes. I think many religious people can give an account of an unexplained event that happens to them that changes them fundamentally. I can. So each religion has a word, and there's moksha, which is release, or there's being born again in the Christian tradition. There's enlightenment. There are all these terms. I could never explain what that might mean, but it does exist. Yes, and we all have our own words for it.
I understand what you said that he left the East to go to the West, right?
Lao Tzu did this in the legend. No. Lao Tzu is a mythical person. Tao means way.
Okay. But now, this Lao Tzu, mythical person, went from East to West, retired.
Yeah.
And he met someone at the way. Now, this instance tells you that this person met another, or this mythical person met another mythical person at the mythical date. So, yet in between this and the explanation that was written down, it is human mind speaking here, not really God, until this Lao Tzu met was revealed and inspired into a way. And this inspiration, what Manish also questioned, where did it come from? This is basically, and I brought you for your journey that you're taking. And don't stop on your journey, please. There are other entities as well and other leaders also to journey into. And for this...
What's your question?
The question is that this person, Lao Tzu, or mythical person, Lao Tzu, when he journeyed from east to west, he was already, he had already a teaching. That is what you said, or what you have read. He had already a teaching. And now he has the time from his teaching now, he has done his job, and he journeyed to the west. The question is, this person seemed to be a prophet to the east of China at the time. That they had a teaching, they already completed his theory, and he was going to find the rest, maybe he's dying or something. And then you mention about inspired about the way, this is how this came to text. Now, who was following him to write out this text?
No, as I say, in the legend, the gatekeeper got him to write it down before he departed.
The gatekeeper?
Yeah. It was written down. I mean, yeah. Is that done?
I think our question time, this question, we're going to really...
No, that's fine.
We're going to answer you short.
Absolutely. No, look, so thanks for listening. It's been short. It's probably not even scratched the surface, but there you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. people out there sincerely journeying life and exploring all that there is to offer. Again, Nika, wish you well on your journey. Our second speaker today is Sister Vernon Harris, who I understand is representing one of two representatives representing the Christian perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernadette Harris, actually. I also coordinate the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission of the Archdiocese of Cape Town. My work in justice and peace really summed up in two things. Justice, which is actually a way of life. Okay, it's called to holiness. Holiness being a way of life. The second one, peace. Peace speaks of relationships. A deep respect for the dignity of your life. I believe that God cares passionately about issues of peace, love, justice, and poverty. A concern for the poor and the emphasis on just and fair behavior flows like a river. It underpins the laws of the Old Testament and resounds through the words of the prophets. Please excuse my notes, because you know, you get to a certain age, you will shorten memory plays you. It forms a core part of all that Jesus said and did, and shapes the activities of all those who follow Jesus. Everywhere in the Holy Scriptures, God's love for the poor and the desire for justice leaps up at you. It is like a road. The middle is always there, but sometimes we need white lines and cat's eyes to make that a bit more obvious. So what is it that Jesus talked about love, justice, and peace? I mean, I think Jesus is known by everyone. He lived on earth for about 33 years, and the last 3 years of his life was what he taught and what remained for centuries. And if you look at it nowadays, 32.5% of the world's population is Christian. But if you look at the top 5 countries who has the highest population of Christianity, which is, if I can recall, the DRC, the Philippines, it would be Brazil, it would be the United States. You know, the highest population of Christianity, and you see, look at those countries and you see what is happening at the moment. Do they follow the teachings of Jesus? So is there a way of life in most of them? And we look at Christianity as it is, and we look at human life today, or we look at people today. Nowadays, people follow their own ways and desires. And the desires of the world sometimes is contrary to what Jesus taught. So, this is what we're talking about. And let's see what Jesus taught. If you look at I'll go directly to scripture now. If you look at the famous teaching of Jesus called the Beatitudes, it says, God blesses those people who depend upon Him. They belong to the kingdom of heaven. God blesses those people who grieve. They will find comfort. God blesses those people who are humble. The earth will belong to them. God blesses those people who want to obey Him more than to eat and or drink. They will be given what they want. God blesses those people who are merciful. they will be treated with mercy. God blesses those people whose hearts are pure. They will see Him. God blesses those people who make peace. They will be called His children. God blesses those people who are treated badly for doing right. They belong to the kingdom of heaven. God will bless you when people insult you or ill-treat you and tell all kinds of evil lies about you because of you, He says. Be happy and excited. You will have a great reward in heaven. People did these things, the same things, to the prophets who lived long ago. So as you can see, if we obey God's commands, God will bless us. And in all of Scripture, it calls for what we are celebrating today: love, peace, justice. Jesus speaks about anger. He says, you know that our ancestors were told, do not murder, and the murderer must be brought to trial. But I promise you that if you are angry with someone, you will have to stand trial. If you call someone a fool, you will be taken to court. And if you say that someone is worthless, you will be in danger of the fires of hell. So, if you are about to place your gift on the altar and remember that someone is angry with you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Make peace with the person, then come back and offer your gift. So once again, here it is about peace. What do? We need to reconcile with each other. We need to move away from anger, hatred, injustices. And again, Jesus speaks about revenge. He says, you know that you have been taught, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, not to try to get even with the person who has done something to you. When someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn and let that person slap the other cheek. If someone sues you for your shirt, give him your coat as well. If a soldier forces you to carry his pack 1 kilometer, carry it 2 kilometers. When people ask you for something, give it to them. When they want to borrow money, lend it to them. So, he speaks about revenge. Do not revenge or do not seek for revenge when someone does something to you. He speaks about love. He says, but I tell you to love your enemies and pray for anyone who ill-treats you. Then you will be acting like your Father in heaven. He makes the sun rise on both good and bad people, and He sends rain for ones who do right and for ones who do wrong. If you love only those people who love you, will God reward you for that? Even tax collectors love your friends. If you greet only your friends, what's so bad about that? Don't even unbelievers do that? But you must always act like your Father in heaven. So, when you give to the poor, don't blow a loud trumpet. When you give to the poor, don't let anyone know about it. Jesus then gives us the powerful prayer of the Our Father when He says, Our Father in heaven, help us to honor your name. So we put God first in our lives. God should be the center of our lives. so that everyone on earth will obey you, and you are obeying Him. Give us our food for today. Forgive us for doing wrong, as we forgive others. Keep us from being tempted, and protect us from evil. And that is sometimes the most difficult to do as Christians. If you forgive others for the wrongs they do to you, your Father in heaven will forgive you. But if you don't forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins. When he speaks about worrying, he says, don't worry and ask yourselves, will we have anything to eat? Will we have anything to drink? Will we have any clothes to wear? Only people who don't know God and always worrying about such things. Your Father in heaven knows what your needs are. But more than anything else, put God's work first and do what He wants. Then the other things will be yours as well. When he speaks about judging, he says, don't condemn others, and God won't condemn you. God will be as hard on you as you are on others. He will treat you exactly as you treat them. Then he says, treat others as you want them to treat you. This is what the law and the prophets are all about. So, go and learn what the scriptures mean when they say, instead of offering sacrifices to me, I want you to be merciful to others. I didn't come to invite good people to be my followers. I came to invite sinners. So God promises came true, just as in the Old Testament in Isaiah the prophet had said, here is my chosen servant. I love him, and he pleases me. I will give him my spirit, and he will bring justice to the nations. He won't shout or howl or call out in the streets. He won't break off a bent reed or put out dying flames. But he will make sure that justice is done. All nations will place their hope in him. So, lastly, I would say is that Jesus calls to mind what Moses wrote, the 10 Commandments, and he says, the commandments can be summed up in 2 commandments. He says, why do you disobey? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and most important commandment. The second most important commandment is like this one. It is, love others as much as you love yourself. All the law of Moses and the books of prophets are based on these 2 commandments. So, if we put God in the center of our lives, and we realize that all of life is sacred, and everything that God has created is sacred, we will be able to, and if we respect that, we will be able to then keep whatever Moses has given to us in the very first place. And in summing up all of this, in our Catholic faith, we have a guide to making good moral choices, which we call the Catholic social teachings. The first one would be is that we are created in the image and likeness of God, whether we are humans and or anything else that God had created. we need to respect. We can't, if we hurt any of those things that God has created, it is like going against what God teaches, going against being like murder to anything else. The second one is a call to family, community, and participation. The person is not only sacred, but is also social. How we organize our societies in economics, politics, in law and policy directly affects human dignity and the capacity of individuals to grow a community. Marriage and family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened, not undermined. We believe people have a right and a duty to participate in society, seeking together the common good and well-being of all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. The third one is rights and responsibilities. The Catholic tradition teaches that human dignity can be protected, and a healthy community can be achieved only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. Therefore, every person has a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. Corresponding to these rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. The fourth one is the option for the poor and the vulnerable. A basic moral test is how our most vulnerable members are faring. In a society marred by deepening divisions between rich and poor, our tradition recalls the story of the Last Judgment in Matthew and instructs us to put the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. Number 5 is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. The economy must serve people, not the other way around. Work is more than a way to make a living. It is a form of continuing participation in God's creation. If the dignity of work is to be protected, then the basic rights of workers must be respected. The right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to the organization and joining of unions, to private property, and to economic initiatives. Number 6 is solidarity. We are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, or ideological differences. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers, wherever they may be. Loving our neighbour has global dimensions in a shrinking world. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. If you want peace, you have to work for justice. The gospel calls us to be peacemakers. Our love for all our sisters and brothers demands that we promote peace in a world surrounded by violence and conflict. And lastly, the care for God's creation. We show our respect for the Creator by our stewardship of creation. Care for the earth is not just an earth-day slogan. It is a requirement of our faith. We are called to protect people and the planet, living our faith in relationship with all of God's creation. This environmental challenge has fundamental moral and ethical dimensions. They cannot be ignored. So, I think it sums up what Jesus has called us to in the Gospels. And I think from this point of view, I think I would finish now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your insight, Sister Darius. The following speaker is going to be representing the Jewish perspective, and that would be Rabbi Sam Flynn. If you address us, please.
I didn't want to interrupt the speaker, but the person who just spoke, he asked for questions. And there is one ringing in my mind. I'm not asking her to answer the question. But I think both speakers that I've listened to up to now have been referring to religion as a way. And it's a journey that we are on. In listening to the speaker who's just spoken, I come from a Christian tradition myself, and so I can align myself with everything that you've said. But when I listen to this, I ask myself of this gathering whether the central issue isn't faith, because we are talking about interfaith connections and association. And the question that I ask myself is that both speakers speak to the fact that the original revelation has been corrupted. Now that revelation was given by God to human beings. And because human beings were given the free will to make a choice, their choices are the things that corrupt. And so even in a Christian world that you speak of, if these are the principles and the behaviors expected from your faith, why are so many Christians away from what those principles are, while they may confess to be Christians? But taking that to the ultimate human race, if those are the principles which I believe is the center of most faiths, justice and peace and kindness and love and all the things that you've indicated, the wanting to yield to the wants of those less fortunate than we are. If those are all the principles, then I'm asking myself, why are we as faith people not living out those principles? Why do we still have our divisions, keeping each other at arm's length? Respect up to a point, but only up to a point. Is that really helping to make the world one? Can I come into this mosque as a Christian? I just live across the way more times than I do if I'm going to show that I have an inclusive idea about my faith. And so those are the things that I believe I'm here for. To hear that faith is not just behaviors. It's not just principles. It's not just commandments. It's the way I live my life. And if those things don't rule my life, then they can be written down in every form you can think of. But it doesn't help to change the world. And so the only way I believe I change the world is by helping to change the person next to me. The world's problems is too big for me. But God hasn't called me to solve the world's problems. He's just called me to be next to the person who needs me. And that could be anybody, anytime and every day of the week. So I just bring that up as a question in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Davis. I think we can all, perhaps some of us, ask that question, we pose that question to ourselves as well. And yes, they can move forward, but perhaps we can entertain that discussion after our program. Thank you so much. Rabbi.
Shalom Aleichem, peace and greetings to you all. It's wonderful to be back and to listen and to learn and to share. I thought we're all sharing and really be giving one another gifts this afternoon. And the first offering that I'll present to you is a joke. And the reason I'll give it to you is you'll hear it's a joke that you can repeat in any community. It's just minor adjustments. And it goes that there was a small town in America, which had very strict gambling laws. But there was a rabbi, an imam, and a priest. You can also add and subtract. Who used to get together one night a week for small stakes poker. And that was an innocent game, but it was illegal. And one day the sheriff busted it up and brought them before the judge, and they were going to face the consequences. So he calls up the first faith leader, you can choose who it is, and he says, listen, you are a holy man, you have devoted your life to God, and I will accept your answer. Were you gambling? And he thinks to himself, what should he say? On the one hand, obviously he should tell the truth. But think of the negative reflection it's going to be, not just on him, on his community, on his religion, on his God. The headlines in the newspaper. He says, God, forgive me. And he says, no, Your Honor, I was not gambling. The judge calls up the second person. He says, were you gambling? And he goes through the same calculation in his mind. And he feels that he's forced to say, Your Honor, I was not gambling. And he calls up the third person, and the joke will be the representative of your faith. And he says, were you gambling? And he says, with who? And I think it's good to laugh together in friendship and brotherhood as well as we share these ideas and bring ourselves a little closer. My brief was to speak briefly about the founder of our religion and also some of the universalistic principles. So I'm not an expert in universalistic principles. I'm not sure how much of what I'm going to say really is universalistic or not. I'm going to share some of the teachings that I've received and what sits with you well and what you feel is applicable and appropriate. That will be my second gift. My name is Rabbi Sam Thurgood. I'm a community rabbi here in Sea Point. I've been here for about 6 years in Cape Town. Before that, I'm originally from Durban, and I've been involved primarily in education before moving across into community. The founder of our religion, you could say really, is our father Abraham. But in terms of the religion of Judaism as we know it, in terms of the structure of the laws and the commandments, that would be Moses, or as we call him in Hebrew, Moshe, or Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, our teacher, Moshe, our master. The years of his life, in the calendar that we use, it was from 1392 BCE that he was born, and he lived until 1272 BCE. He lived 120 years. In the Hebrew, he lived from the year 1168 until 1288. And, 2168 until 2368, I get confused with the different calendars, until 2488. He was born as a member of the slave people in Egypt. At that point, the Jewish people were living in Egypt as slaves. There was a decree that the Pharaoh had made that the Jewish baby boys particularly would be cast into the river. And in order to save his life, his mother, who is not named at this point, places him in a basket in the river. And it is Pharaoh's own daughter who comes down to the river and rescues and adopts him. He's raised in the royal palace. And later on, when he sees the injustices done and the way in which the Jewish people are treated, he identifies himself with the nation of his birth. The famous psychologist, Dr. Sigmund Freud, points out that the story of Moses, of Moshe, is really an inversion of the great stories of many ancient heroes. Usually what you hear about is a child born in the royal family, hidden away with slaves and grows up amongst slaves, who eventually realizes that he is in fact a member of the royal family. Whereas if you notice, the story with Moses is exactly the opposite. He is born to slaves, raised by the royal family, and then realizes that his real people are the slaves. And I think the first message that our tradition is teaching us through that is what is true royalty and what is true power. It's not the palaces, and it's not the control, and it's not the wealth, but it is righteousness and justice. A corrupt Pharaoh, a person who made his life by ruling tyrannically over others, is not the one who is the true king. But the humble slave who lives with faith and goodness is in fact the royalty. And so that's how I would explain it. Freud doesn't explain it because of a funny explanation. But that's my explanation of this inversion, of this phenomenon, that we are learning from Moses' life itself what is true greatness and what is true royalty. We all know him as Moses or Moshe, but in fact that was not the name his parents gave him. Our Torah, the Bible says that was the name given to him by Pharaoh's daughter. We don't read explicitly the name that his parents gave him, but our tradition says that name was either Tov, which means good, or Tuvia, which means God's goodness. His parents gave him another name of Tuvia, and it was Pharaoh's daughter who gave him this name. In fact, our sages say that he was given 10 different names, such as Avigdor, Avisocho, and many others. Each of these names relating to a different aspect of who he was and what he brought to the world. For example, Avisocho means the father of the prophets. We believe that Moshe was the greatest of all the prophets, and so that was a major role that he played as the father of the prophets, and so that was one of his names. The name Avigdor means the father of those who build fences. We believe in our tradition that not only do we have the biblical law, but we also have laws that were made, rabbinic laws, that were made in order to protect and fence in that Torah and those laws, and that was a role that Moshe played as well. He also was the lawgiver. He was the one who gave the commandments and brought the Torah down from Mount Sinai, and that was another aspect of his name. However, we find throughout the Torah he's referred to basically by one name only, and that name is Moshe. And our tradition teaches us that that is because God said, Pharaoh's daughter took you in and gave you life. Had she not done this, which could have been viewed by her father Pharaoh as treachery, as betrayal, had she not risked her life to take in an orphan child, he would have died. And so by giving him life, by taking in an orphan, she, so to speak, earned the right to his name. And it is by that name that Moses is called throughout the Torah and in our tradition ever since. If you look at Moses' personal journey, we are introduced to him as an adult. As soon as it tells us he's grown up, we are introduced to him by the way in which he intervenes in 3 different disputes. And the previous chief rabbi of South Africa, Rabbi Sorrel Harris, and I'll just mention that tonight is the anniversary of his death. So I say these words in his name. Chief Rabbi Harris pointed out that the first dispute in which Moses is involved is when he sees the persecution of one of the Jewish slaves by an Egyptian slave master. And so that, in a sense, you could say, is patriotic, is nationalistic, standing up with his people and for his people against his oppressors. However, that's the first stage of his journey. The second argument he gets involved in is between 2 Jews who are fighting. Now, we all know that members of our own communities never fight one another, but imagine in biblical times it's told that such a thing happened, that Moses witnesses these 2 Jews, and even there he intervenes. Yet he was not protecting his people against another people. He was getting involved within these squabbles and disputes of his own community and courageously taking a stand to establish justice. But again, it doesn't stop there. Because when he is exiled from Egypt and Pharaoh decrees death upon him, he goes off to the land of Midian, where there's a group of shepherd girls who are trying to draw water, and they are chased away by other shepherds. It's people who have nothing to do with them. It's 2 groups of strangers. And yet nonetheless, here as well, Moses intervenes, standing up for what is right and for what is just. So it's no longer just for his own people. It's no longer just a sense of building his community, but standing up for goodness and justice in the world is another value that we see modeled in Moses' life. Moses then becomes a family man. He marries one of the girls that he saved at the well, and with her he begins a family. And yet, one cannot escape from concluding that his life is essentially very lonely. After all, he never really integrates into the Jewish people whom he leads, because by his upbringing, he's an Egyptian prince. He certainly isn't a member of the Egyptian royal family. He has distanced himself from that and become the leader of the Jewish people. And even within his family, his children do not follow in his footsteps in the way in which he hoped, and they themselves do not become great Jewish leaders. And so as much as he is a symbol of everything that's great, we also see some of the sacrifices that a person must make in order to achieve such spiritual greatness and in order to achieve greatness for one's people and for one's community. Another lesson we see from Moses' life is that of the burning bush. Whilst he is working for his father-in-law, another good Jewish profession, he takes the sheep out into the desert and he witnesses a burning bush. And yet there's something very strange. The bush is burning, but it is not consumed. And he says, let me turn aside and see what is this wondrous thing. At that point, the Torah says that God saw that Moses had turned aside, and then God began to speak to him. And from there we see, one of our sages says, that had Moses not turned aside, God would not have spoken to him. Because the great thing that you see about Moses in this moment is that he was responsive to what was going on around him. It was not simply a case of having the principles of life established in his mind and then walking on with whatever he had, but he looked around and he saw there was something here which doesn't fit in with my worldview. There's something here that I don't understand. There's something that is beyond me. Let me investigate and explore and discover further. And it is at that point that he, so to speak, meets God. We find that as close as his relationship with God was, and we believe that he was not only the greatest prophet, but the greatest person who ever lived, nonetheless, he argues with God himself out of service and duty and loyalty to his people. As the leader of the Jewish people, he is willing to put his own life on the line and even his own relationship with God. After the Jewish people worship the golden calf, after the revelation at Mount Sinai, Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments and sees them praying to this idol, to the statue. He smashes the 10 Commandments, he smashes the golden calf. After he sorted out the whole situation, he returns to the mountain where God says, I'm willing, I'm prepared now to destroy the Jewish people. And Moses said, God, if you would do such a thing, erase me from your book. He is willing to put his own life on the line for his people. And that's a lesson that we learn of what it truly means to be a leader, that one stands with one people for good or for not so good. In fact, our sages teach us that a community leader or a teacher must be very, very careful in the students that he chooses, but perhaps even more pointedly, in the way in which he or she develops and nurtures these students. Because it is impossible, says our tradition, that the students will be upstairs and the teacher will be downstairs, you know what I'm saying? Or vice versa. Wherever the students go, that is where the teacher is bound to follow. And so that's a scary message, I think, in one sense, but on the other sense, something that is modeled for us by Moses. One of the lessons we see as well is that he is willing to learn from others. Our tradition teaches that a wise person is not one who knows a lot, but one who is willing to learn from all of those around him. And Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who was not an adherent of the Jewish faith, comes to meet up with Moses and instructs him in how he should set up a judicial system and tells him how to establish a system of justice and of judges. And Moses listens and accepts it. However, Moses makes an important change, because when his father-in-law tells him how to set up the judges, he says, choose people of integrity. Moses indeed chooses people of integrity, but he takes it a step further and he commands them as to how they should judge cases. And the question I heard asked recently was, how can you command judges how to judge cases? Surely the whole point of making them a judge is that they then take over. And the answer I heard was that no. Moses commanded them as to how to do it because even judges, he taught them the lesson that even judges ultimately are accountable to a higher authority. Even the greatest judges in the land need to know that the justice they are establishing is not their justice, but is God's justice, and that therefore they are accountable to God in the way in which they go about it. And so you see within that appointment of judges both his willingness to listen and to learn from somebody else, and his insistence that every single human being, even the greatest judge, must ultimately subjugate himself and his life to God. We find as well that within all of his teachings, which we believe are really God's teachings, our tradition teaches that as opposed to other prophets, many prophets played somewhat of an interpretive role in what they received. They saw or heard a message from God and then they put it into their own words and transmitted it. We believe that that was not the case with Moshe. We believe that the words he said are the words that God said. He was, so to speak, a mouthpiece for the presence of the divine. And so to speak about Moses' teachings for us really means to speak about God's teachings. And we see throughout these teachings a focus on taking care of those who are in need and who are in trouble. I recently saw an interview with a panel of 20 different rabbis, and the question was, if you could choose any 3 people to have around your table, who would they be? So one says, Moses, and he named an Abraham, and he named a couple of others, and somebody said something else, and this person said, I would choose a widow, an orphan, and a convert. Those are the 3 people who are always the symbols in the Torah of those who are in need. The convert is somebody coming from another nation. This was an agrarian economy. People made a living from having farms. And so this was somebody who would have come in without a source of income. And time and again, Moses gives us the injunction from God that those are the people we must look for and take care of. Mysteriously, Moshe is denied entry to the Promised Land. He spends his professional life engaged in these great acts of self-sacrifice and leadership and teaching and education, taking the Jewish people out of Egypt, grappling with them time and again in the desert, suffering disappointment and betrayal, and yet at the same time witnessing greatness and good things. But at the border of the Promised Land, there's a mysterious incident that takes place, after which he himself is told that he cannot enter the land. What exactly it was that he did is a topic of another discussion, but the point that I want to extract from there, the lesson from the life of Moses, is that sometimes we have to make peace with the fact that our life's mission is not accomplished in our lifetime. Moses, who gave everything to bring the Jewish people into the Promised Land, was not successful in doing so. He dies, and they remain at the edge of the Promised Land, and he, so to speak, hands on the baton, he hands on that charge to his student Joshua, hoping and trusting that his students will get the job, and the next generation will get the job done that he himself was not able to accomplish. And that itself was a source of inspiration for many generations to come. I recall the quote of Martin Luther King. He said in one of his final speeches, I've looked over and I've seen the Promised Land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the Promised Land. And that clearly is a reference to this biblical text of Moses also standing at that entrance, and the fact that he was able to see that the work would be accomplished, even though it was not something that he himself would be able to do, serves also, I think, as a message of inspiration for many generations and years to come. So these are some of the lessons that I thought to combine the 2 themes, universalistic teachings and the biography, by trying to put them together, that you have this great man, really of lowly birth, who returns to his people, who's inspired always by a desire to establish justice and peace and righteousness, who it doesn't matter to him who the people are, that it should be that people are living with fairness and equality. A person who is ultimately lonely in his responsibility, but able and willing to take that over, take on that role. A person who is willing to respond to new things that he sees in life that he hadn't considered before, and to change his direction based on that. A person who stands with his people and is devoted to his charge of leadership, even beyond life itself. A person who is willing to learn and listen to others, and also command even the greatest judges that there is an ultimate authority, a person who is our primary lawgiver, but also teaches us the laws of compassion, a person who did not give any of his own teachings, despite the fact that he's seen as our greatest teacher, but rather transmitted only the teachings from God. And finally, a person who through the end of his life teaches us that although we may not ultimately complete the journey, every step that we take along it and every point that we bequeath to future generations is something special and valuable. Once again, thank you for your time and attention and for this opportunity to learn together.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I understand that the Rabbi will be leaving now. But you made aware of that. And our national president would like to have a segment of our program where we present our speakers with. But since you're leaving in a hurry, a question. You asked me.
Question, Rabbi. Don't run away.
I'd love to take a memorial service to get that. I'm happy to take questions if that's okay, Mickey. You've got a couple of minutes.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Because I heard lots of different names for Moses.
Yes.
And what they meant. What does the name Moses mean?
Yes. I had that in my notes and I decided not to say it, so I'm glad you asked. I can say I read all my notes. So Moses, the word Moshe, means to be drawn out. So Pharaoh's daughter said, I drew him out of the water, so she gave him the name Moshe. And one of our great sages, the Maharal of Prague in the 1500s, says the water represents the physical world. And Moses was a person who was drawn out of the water, was raised above the desires of physicality, was able to have this great perspective and connection. Is there another question?
Okay, it's also a quick one. When Moses, what did you say he did when he saw the great bush?
He turned aside.
Turned aside, what does that mean?
So he was busy with his sheep in this direction, and he sees it over there, so he says, okay, I'm stopping what I'm doing, or my plan for the day, I'm going to go that way. But she changed his path. I saw another area, I will turn aside, and I'll go and see. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
You can change your mind, Rabbi.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Okay. The number of speakers to go, and this we are the time, there is some time constraints, so perhaps if the speakers have not to follow the time that we've allocated for them. The next speaker is Mr. Cecil Purpose, who will be presenting Buddhism.
Assalamu alaikum. Goedemiddag. Greetings of peace to everyone. My name is Cecil. I'm representing SGI, that's the Circuit Gakkai International. We are a lay Buddhist organization and we represent the Buddhism of Nichiren. You are hearing in this talk often referring to Nichiren Daishonin. Daishonin is a title. It means great sage. So when I say Nichiren Daishonin, I'm talking about the great wise man, Nichiren. And sometimes I'll just say the Daishonin, the wise man. Nichiren's story starts in the 13th century Japan. He was called Zenichi Maro and was born on February the 16th, 1222, in a fishing village in the Awa province of Japan. That meant that he came from the lowest rung of the feudal society of that time. Also within the Buddhist paradigm, it was very bad karma to be born a fisherman or a hunter, because your livelihood depended upon killing, taking life. So your situation would be so difficult, you wouldn't be able to make enough good karma to repay your karmic debt. So in terms of the religious view of the time, it started with a negative. Japan was ruled by a shogun. There was an emperor, but his power was already weakened in the previous century. So the emperor was simply a puppet leader in Kyoto, the old capital. The new center of power was Kamakura, where a family actually ruled since the 12th century, well into the 13th century. One single family, the Hojo clan, ruled the country. So this is the conditions of the great sage Nichiren's birth. Buddhism was already the established religion at that time in Japan. As a young child, Zenichi Maro vowed to become the wisest person in Japan. He entered the monastery at the age of 12 years. At 16, he took his monastic orders and became a Buddhist priest, and was renamed Zeshoho Rencho. He went on to study Buddhism at various temples. The first temple he studied at was a Nembutsu school. Nembutsu is Pure Land Buddhism, who believes in a heavenly or divine Buddha. If you pray to him, you will go and live with him after you've died. He also went on to study Zen Buddhism, which was very popular at that time, particularly among the samurai class. And that's also why the West is very popular, because it came to us through the martial arts. And he studied Shingon Buddhism, which is an esoteric form of Buddhism. To relate it to our audience, if you think about the Buddhism of Northern India, Nepal, Tibet, so it's related to that kind of Buddhism, dealing with very elaborate rituals and secret transmission between initiates. He also studied Tendai Buddhism, of which I'll say a few things there, but he also studied Hinayana Buddhism, strict monastic Buddhism. Looking at all these forms of Buddhism, you realize that they were not following Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder of this religion's teachings. Among all these schools, we found that the Tendai school was the closest, but even they were not following Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, what makes the Tendai school different? Tendai is the Japanese name for Tiantai, who also was a sage and philosopher, Chinese sage and philosopher and he was somebody who collected the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. And then he ordered these teachings in the way the Buddha taught it in his lifetime. He also realized that these teachings were applicable or relevant at different stages in history since the time of Shakyamuni and his time, that's now Tiantai. And he realized that the Lotus Sutra was the essence of the Buddha's teaching. So it was sort of like summarizing and also taking the essence of all the teachings that went before. To Nichiren, looking at the views of Tiantai or from Tendai school he studied at, this made sense. And he realized that even they weren't following that. On April the 28th, 1253, the Daishonin declared the establishment of true Buddhism at Senchoji Temple, and he started to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo for the first time. And he also took the name Nichiren, which means sun lotus. Now, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo The Myoho Renge Kyo is actually the title of the Lotus Sutra. It's the sutra's actual name. The Nam comes from Sanskrit, which means devotion. So when we say Nam or Namo or Namu, it means devotion. So Nam Myoho Renge Kyo means I devote my life to the mystical law of the Lotus Flower Sutra. Okay. There's more to this title. The Myoho part, Myo means that which from our sensory perspective is not manifested. So from the way our senses work, it doesn't exist, but it is there potentially. It actually exists, but not from the way we can see it, or hear it, or feel it, or smell it. Ho is the manifested aspect. So Myoho is one, the unmanifested and the manifested. Renge, so Myoho together we call the mystical law, that which guides our whole existence. Renge means lotus flower. But the lotus flower is, I always say, it's the rose of the East. Right? It's a flower with a very deep symbolic value in Asia. Now the lotus flower is a beautiful flower that grows in a muddy pond. So it also shows us that good or beauty can come from something that's ugly or dirty or smelly. Kyo, Sutra, is the way the teachings are transmitted. So how is it transmitted? Through speech. By people talking to each other. Dialogue, conversation, friendship. The first persecution followed immediately after Nichiren Daishonin declared the Buddhism of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. There was a plot to attack him, but he escaped that particular plot. On July the 16th, 1260, he submitted a treatise, the Risho Ankoku Ron, which means on securing the peace and prosperity of the land and the propagation of true Buddhism, to the regent Hojo Tokyo. So that was the person ruling the country at the time. And he made a call to the regent to call the country back to true Buddhism. Also the situation, besides being a feudal society with things being very difficult for people at the lowest rung, the society was also, the country also suffered from many disasters, earthquakes, typhoons, droughts. It sounds almost a bit like our own world today. In that same year, the cottage he lived in was attacked by followers of the most popular school, Nembutsu school, the Pure Land school. In 1261, the Daishonin was exiled to the Izu Peninsula. 2 years later, he was pardoned and he returned to Kamakura, the center of power. On November 11, 1261, the same year, he was attacked by swordsmen and he suffered an injury to his head and he broke his left hand. One of his followers was killed. He returned okay, sorry, just got my thing wrong here. He also wrote 11 letters to government officials and high-ranking priests. That's after his return from exile there. And this was his second demonstration with the government. Okay. In fact, in his whole life, he demonstrated with the government 3 times. And after that, he retreated, following the advice of the ancient sages that you speak 3 times, and if they don't listen or they don't want to hear you, then it is fine to retreat and let cause and effect take over. There was a plot to execute him. He was arrested, but they failed. What happened actually was there was an event in the night sky. We're not exactly sure. It could have been a falling comet or a meteoric shower there. But it frightened his captors so much that they refused to kill him, even though that was their job at that time. And you know, within, if you understand anything about feudal Japan, you know, you had to do what your employer told you, you know, particularly if you were a samurai, which was the military and the police of that time. So they must have realized that there was something about this man, that they couldn't get so far to actually take his life. Nichiren Daishonin also realized his true mission on earth at that point, that he was the Buddha of the latter day of the law. Now that is also a term which comes from the Chinese sage, Buddhist sage, Tiantai. The Japanese already believed that in the 13th century they were living in the latter day of the law. The law there refers to Dharma, Buddhism, as I understood. What it meant was that the religion was already in its phase of decline, because Buddhism started in India. So Japan was the furthest point east for its movement there. So from there, either it will die or it will have to move somewhere else, right? West to the Americas or south. You know, there. So that was the realization already at that time. The Japanese have a word for it, they call it in Japanese translation or pronunciation mappo, or mappo as we would say in English. He also realized that he was Jogyo, one of the Buddhas mentioned in the Lotus Sutra. So he was fulfilling the prophecy of Shakyamuni Buddha, that at that time, in the latter day of the law, somebody will come to uphold the true teachings of the Buddha. He was again exiled. This is the second time, this time to Sado Island. But he was pardoned on March 13, 1274, and he turned back to Kamakura. So he was undefeated. Whatever they tried to do against him, he always would return and would keep teaching. That was also the time when he talked to the government for the third and final time. On May the 12th, he left for Mount Minobu, not to retreat from the world, but to spend his last years teaching, writing, receiving visitors, and mentoring successors, so that Buddhism can continue after his life. On October the 12th, 1279, he inscribed the Gohanzon. Now the Gohanzon is a mandala. It's a calligraphic mandala, and I always explain it to people in this way. If you think about an artist, doesn't matter what the art form is, but it will be easier to explain it with a visual art form, painting. The artist expresses something of what's inside of him or her. And when we look at the work of art, we get a sense, the work of art speaks to us. It tells us something of what went on in that person's mind. So the mandala, this is my personal, it's not an official religious view there, but I look at the mandala as that. When I see the mandala, I see Nichiren's state of Buddhahood as he represented it in the physical form. Now, to stay with our topic, I hope my time is still good. What does his life and teaching mean to us? Because remember, as Nichiren Buddhists, we are only a few in this country. It means that we must have a seeking spirit, because Nichiren went from different schools of Buddhism to find out, what is the true teaching. It's important to know the essence of religion. true and correct practice do not necessarily mean identical practice, meaning to practice exactly the way it was in the past. Because times change, people change. We must know the essence of the religion. Right? So in terms of practicing Shakyamuni's religion, doesn't mean that I need to wear a robe, or shave my head, or wear sandals. Even though that may be fine, you know, in terms of my culture or the environment that I'm in, but that doesn't make me a Buddhist. Because people can also fake it by doing all the correct things that make me look. So I can have all the Buddha tattoos. You know, I can shave my head and wear the beads, but I'm not actually practicing. Because that's actually what happened in Japan. Before Nichiren's teachings were established, was that you still have these very beautiful, magnificent temples, aesthetically pleasing architectural wonders there, but they were not following the correct teaching. You would have also beautiful inscripted sutras, you know, beautifully done, very artistic there. And I love it as a Buddhist there, but people were not reading the sutras. People were not studying, and people were not living. So in Nichiren's Buddhism, when we read the sutra, your academic understanding of it is good, but that's not so important. So if I go back to Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nichiren said, even if you only understand Nam, you can teach to somebody else. You don't have to know the whole phrase. So when we study the scriptures, you don't have to be a scholar, as good as that may be, but as long as you know one thing or one phrase there, and you know the well, you can tell it to somebody else, and you can have a conversation, and all idea of dialogue again. Another thing also about Nichiren that showed in his lifetime, the view, and still is to a large extent in the Buddhist world, is that Buddhahood is really for monks or priests there. And also for women, it's a bit difficult. They first have to reincarnate and become a man. So even if you're a nun, you can practice, right? But you will have to become a man in the next life. Nichiren said, no, everybody can attain Buddhahood. Whether you're a priest, whether you're a monk, whether you're a nun, whether you're a layman, whether you're a laywoman, whether you're a child, you know. So it doesn't matter about your age or the form that you have. Also, religion and spirituality must be decentralized. Okay, so away from the temples, religion goes with us. It goes to the workplace. Goes to our home. So in our community, we will have the hands-on in our houses, and we meet and we pray there. We do meet, obviously, community too. And we must recognize the tremendous potential in others and in ourselves. The Buddha nature, which we all share. And the Buddha nature isn't just in people. It's also in the environment. In animals, in the earth, in everything. So we must have respect for all of that. Okay, I think I've got just under 1 minute, so somebody's going to ask me a question. Thank you very much for listening.
Did the founder claim some divine inspiration?
No.
Another question is, how many Buddhas have come after what's their supreme?
Shakyamuni.
How many Buddhas during the course of his existence to the Ahmadiyya?
Okay, I don't have the exact number of Buddhas, but there were, for instance, after the Buddha's lifetime, some of the people that were with him attained Buddhahood. So among Ananda, Mahakashyapa attained Buddhahood, Nagarjuna attend Road and so on. So if you go to the line, even to somebody like Tien Tai, you also. So there are many in between, from the Indian period, Chinese period, and so on.
So this means that these people, or these Buddhas that came afterwards, were inculcating the true teachings of the Buddha, or
Yes.
as it was corrupted by time.
Yeah, they were upholding Shakyamuni's teaching. So the teaching didn't disappear after Shakyamuni's death. There were actually people at all times who were upholding the teaching. Between that and Nichiren's time, and hopefully between Nichiren's time and myself speaking, there are always people upholding the teachings.
So,
I think because there are other speakers, perhaps after the program you can all look up the team.
Thank you.
And ask questions. Thank you. And these speakers on the Hindu faith, Ahmadiyya Kittiba.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Namaskar to everybody. When it's called, I think, he started his talk with a joke, and it also reminds me one very short joke, because it's the topic regarding peace, love, and justice. So, husband came home with lot of tiredness, and his wife started talking this and that, and his wife was learning English language. She started talking. The husband told, I am very, very tired. I need some peace. They immediately say, okay, rest in peace. No, darling, rest in peace. Rest in peace. He used some English words. Very respected Ibrahim told me that we are going to talk about the founders of Hinduism and every religion. Then we had some discussion at our home of 1.5 hours. Now he is very good friend of mine. So the question comes, who is the founder of Hindu religion? And you can't give one name. You can't give one name. Because we believe that this person is the founder of this religion. Suppose that Muhammad Paigambar Sahib will take. But actually he was the instrument. What is written in Quran is by the instrument of Muhammad Sahib. Basically, the things which were coming, it was some higher force. It was higher force, from higher force. And it is equally applied to each and every religion. Buddhism, Jesus. You take any holy granth of any religion, any holy book of any religion. The founder was the instrument to express the desire of Almighty. So, they had right to write their name. That this is Holy Quran, Muhammad Paigambar is true. But in Hinduism, that wise person receives thought, no, it is coming from higher force, why should we write our name? So nobody wrote their name. They only mention the symbol. And the symbolic name of that all wise person is Vyas. So you find a lot of scripture in Hinduism is in the name of Vyas. Vyas means use. Very vast. Vyas means which covers everything, like sky. You know, sky is also not proper term to compare that words Vyas. But you will find Vyas as a person, or one character also you will find in Hindu scripture as a person, as a character. So then he himself suggested me, very beautiful. He told me that, okay, you talk about Krishna. It was easier for me. I know the subject is very deep. And to talk about Krishna, we normally do katha, the satsang, the 9 days ceremony, 7 days ceremony about talking about the Krishna. So here 15 minutes. But he gives strength, Allah gives strength, Almighty gives strength to say something about it. Without any more clarification, let us start with love. Actually, Krishna is love Purush, Prem Purush. Purush means not in the sense of man, but the form. He is the form of love. Who is going there? Prem Purush is going there. Prem Purush. Each and every substance and cell of his body is full of love, is Krishna. He can love anybody. Actually, he loves everybody, including his enemy. lot of things we find in Mahabharata, in Bhagavad, in Harivansh Puran about the Krishna. And when we take Krishna as a substance or as an essence, and when we read that books, then we also start inside of us to love the Krishna without any differences of the religion. I know a lot of my Muslim friends, Muslim friends. I saw in one book, Jai Shri Krishna, and the poet and lot of things was written by a friend Ilyas Sheikh. He is Muslim, he followed Muslim Dharma, Islam Dharma, and he is very good in Islam also. But he says, when I read this thing, so I realize Krishna, I sense Krishna within me. And the temperature of my body is not Ushnataman. It is in our Gujarati language, Ushnataman, means temperature. He says, my body's measurement is not connected with Ushnataman. It is connected with Krishnataman. And he is true Islamic scholar. Very learned person. Then he adds, okay, nothing is stopping me to love this Krishna. And he has got his one boy. So in every Janmashtami, the day of the birth of Krishna, he has put his photo also on Facebook. So see, this is my son, and every Janmashtami, the birthday of Krishna, we make him as a Krishna, Lal Gopal, small child, Lalu, and we celebrate Janmashtami. So in short, Krishna is the symbol of love. And he gives all kinds of freedom to you. He was very brave. He is very brave. He was very brave as a character. And in Gita, one holy scripture, one part of the Mahabharata, he saw the very loose form of him to his disciple, his friend Arjuna, that look at me, look in me, but you will not able to see my loose form with this eyes, this physical eyes. So I will have give to one third eye, and then that is called Ajja Chakra according to yoga. And then he showed him, now look at me. And then Arjuna found, oh, everything is in Krishna. And he thought that is called Vishwa Virat Darshan. And if you go to the capacity and ability of our body brain structure, if we can develop some area of our body brain structure, then we can have some glimpse of that energies. But this is not the subject of the thing. So he loved everybody, including animal. And he was from his childhood to his old age, he lived almost 118 years. He gave the message of love, message of peace, and message of justice by his action, by his behavior. We believe as a Bhagwan, as a God in our Hinduism. And when I was listening to brother, we also believe Buddha as a God in our religion. And our religion says that you have got the same capacity, same abilities, same energies, everything in equal proportion which our great messenger has got. The difference only in our life is they have developed that energy, or they have tried, they have made effort to for the realization, and we haven't tried. Just only one difference is there. Because of our limitations, and because of our logical brain, and because of our conditioning of mind, and because of our different kind of beliefs, we have some that kind of problem. So how is this problem? It is not possible. How can it? So, and then that limitation comes. You can't talk. If we are standing here, we are sitting here, and if somebody is talking from the top of our mosque, and is looking everywhere, you can see from here to there, and if he is telling something, and by sitting in this area, we can't say, oh, who is telling? Who are you? This is not possible. According to science, according to logical brain, according to reason, it is impossible. So, Krishna delivered all kind of message. He gave all kind of freedom. He told to his disciple, his friend, okay, this is my original form, okay, but now you must do whatever you like. Yathenchi tatha guru. He never told you have to do this and you have to follow this. Yes, he told that if you will follow this path, you will have very fortunate result in your life. He was the Param Purush of love. Then we come to peace, Shanti. In our scripture, and throughout his life, Krishna worked hard for peace, to spread to many peace. And I'm telling the essence of the story just. On one day, battle war was declared against Pandavas and Kauravas, between two brothers. Then it was Krishna who went to Kauravas, who was not ready to give a single piece of land to the Pandavas. Then he told, on behalf of Pandavas, he told this thing without taking the permission of 5 Pandavas, 5 brothers. If you give only 5 villages to 5 brothers, then we don't want war, we don't want battle. But the Duryodhana refused to give. He told, I am not giving a single piece of land. Then a story goes on. We go into the Ramayana. Ravana kidnapped the wife of Ram, Masita, and Ram tried to avoid the war. Once his messenger Hanumanji went into the Lanka, he tried to explain the Ravana, please give back Sita Maya to Ram. He refused. Again, the battle, the war was on the point. It was just nearly to start. Again, Ram sent his messenger as an Angad. Again he explained, requested, we don't want war, battle, please give back the Sita Maya. He refused. So, in our scripture, in our this character, and Ram was the avatar of Krishna. And Krishna is concerned, you will find flute always in his hand. So flute is a symbol of music. music of peace, music of love, music of justice, music of all positive qualities. Flute, when he played the flute, the positive effect of the flute, it is in our scripture. You will find very nice description about the effect of the playing of the music of flute on the whole atmosphere and animal and plant. And now science has proved all this. If you are playing violin and the cow will give you more milk. And actually somebody has sent me the video. Even the cow is standing there and she is playing violin, and after 15-20 seconds, milk starting coming out from the cow. So now science is doing everything, and there is beautiful description regarding the music and sound of the peace by flute. And last one, justice. Although he had all kind of capacity, strength, all kind of thing, he always tried to establish the example of justice to each and every person. And that's why he created courage in small people, so-called small people, lower class people. He united them. He tried to love them, he tried to guide them, and he gave courage and message. You have also the same capacity. And as a weakness, there is some differences, and I'm not going now. Time is almost. So next time, our meeting, inshallah, with God blessing, Allah's blessing, Almighty's blessing, whatever, I have no problem with any words. If it will be possible, very beautiful and very interesting story of Krishna and Ram and all other scriptures. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our last speaker this afternoon representing the faiths will be the representative for the Islamic faith, Mr. Ahmadiyya.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مَالِكِ الْقُدُّوسِ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ هُوَ الَّذِي بعث في الأميين الرسول منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كان من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. Mr. Chairman, various representatives from different religious groups, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, I greet you all with an Islamic salutation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. For the sake of our guests who are not Muslims, the meaning of Islam or the meaning of the greetings is that may the peace and the blessings of our omnipotent Creator, the Alpha and the Omega, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings be showered upon all of us. Mr. Chairman, today I have chosen to speak not on the prophecies of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but have elected to highlight his personality as a man, as a simple servant of God, and as a humble person who lived all his life among his brothers, followers, and enemies as a true man. In this regard, I have chosen some few facts of his real life and will share them with you for you to judge how close he was to human, yet how vastly different he was. I would like to present to you some few of his lifestyle before he was elected, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a revelation that he was a prophet. He got married to a woman called Hazrat Khadija, who was a very popular woman in the Arab Peninsula, very rich woman. This woman developed love for our beloved Prophet Muhammad simply because of how honest and sincere and justice he was. This woman decided to hand over his all properties to Muhammad simply because of the way he knew him. They got married when Rasulullah was at the age of 15 years and Hazrat Khadija was also at the age of 40 years. 45. 25 and 40. One day, he came from where he mostly used to pray, which was called Hira. When he came from the Hira, he was shivering. So Hazrat Khadija confronted him and asked, "My love, what is happening to you?" When he heard that Rasulullah was shivering, he asked, "Why are you suffering from fever, or you are seriously sick?" Rasulullah replied to him that Allah has conveyed a message to me through an angel Gabriel, that he has appointed me as a prophet. When Hazrat Khadija heard this was the words he gave to our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That on hearing this, Khadija addressed him and said, "I have known you for some time, and I know you look after the requirements of the needy and share their miseries. You are a person who carries the burdens of those whose backs are broken under the load of affliction. You are restoring the virtues which have disappeared from the earth. You are kind and considerate to relations and observe the very best conduct in relationships. You are true and always have been so. How could God let you go to waste? I believe in what you have seen." It was the purity of this man within him which convinced his wife that he was a true prophet. Mr. Chairman, the topic today to be dealt with has to do in relation of the lifestyle of our Prophet Muhammad, his own personal lifestyle, how he exhibited love, peace, and justice throughout his life. Time may not permit me to enumerate all his character in relation to all those attributes, but suffice to therefore, I will try to figure out some few, to which I would like to present to you his love unanimously towards love to mankind. Once during a journey, on a very cold summer day, he was resting under the shade of a tree. A Belgian who belongs to the enemies saw his opportunity as the Holy Prophet was alone. So he woke him up and decided to stab him with a sword. When the Holy Prophet woke up, the man confronted him. "Today is only between me and you. Who is going to save you?" Upon hearing this, the Holy Prophet said that I believe in my Allah and I know my Creator can save me. When this man heard This reply from the Lord Prophet Muhammad, he overwhelmed, and the sword left his hands and fell on the ground. The Holy Prophet Muhammad picked this sword and also asked him, now I'm in the position of the sword, who is going to save you? The man trembled with fear could only reply, you are generous and merciful person. Please spare my life. The Holy Prophet said, woe unto you. You did not even draw a lesson. It was God who saved me from you. This man was pardoned, of course. The Holy Prophet was a very big-hearted, loving person. So how could such a person still advise his followers to spread his message with a sword? Mr. Chairman, the whole world now see Muslims as terrorists, to which some of them too perpetuate themselves through the word jihad. Jihad is an Arabic word which is derived from the root word jahid, which means to strive or to struggle. During his own personal lifetime, a time came to which the enemies attacked them and they were able to defend themselves. Right afterwards, his companions were jubilating. Then he confronted them. What have you gained that you are happy? They said, oh, our beloved, you saw how our enemies attacked us, and you know how we defended ourselves. We were able to be victorious, so we need to jubilate. He said, no. We have three categories of jihad. The first and the foremost is to deal with your own deviant behavior. You being a liar, you being a cheater, you being a deceiver. If you are able to deal with this, then you can say you've completed jihad. The second stage of jihad is to look at someone you respect so much with honor, seeing the person doing something wrong, and you are able to confront the person politely and tell him that, oh please, ma'am, or that, this and that you are doing, please, is not the right thing. He said that's the second part of jihad. The third of jihad is when someone is attacking you and you are defending yourself. So if such a man is able, for his own lifetime, able to convey a message with a clear definition of the word they are using now, jihad, as a terrorist, you all bear me witness where they are drawing theirs from, not from the lifestyle of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Mr. Chairman, in relation for his passion for peace, a story of a Bedouin who visited the masjid and was urinating at the courtyard. Our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to receive visitors, to which there was a time. These visitors came around him, and one of them spent the night in the room of the masjid. The love our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ have for a masjid where we pray is anonymous. But this person doesn't know the ethics of the masjid. So upon that, he stood up from the masjid and just at the entrance was trying to urinate. Both the companions and Rasulullah were present. Some of the companions rushed to push him, but were immediately stopped by the Holy Prophet. They were told not to disturb him during the act. When he finished, the Holy Prophet asked for a bucket of water, and he himself washed that place. Then he turned to his companions and said, "You were not raised by God to cause difficulties for people. Always remember that you were raised to bring relief, peace, and tranquility to mankind." Mr. Chairman, the same about his story relating to peace. It happened a time that some Jews migrated and came to him for a debate. The debate took them for 3 days. So the time came for them to sit up and pray for themselves. So they tried to confront Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told him that we need to go outside and pray because it's time for us to pray. Upon hearing this, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that the mosque was also a place of worship, and they were welcome to pray there, and they did. In the meantime, some companions reached the mosque and saw the Christians worshiping facing the opposite direction from the Qibla in that mosque. They moved forward to object to this, but firmly the Holy Prophet prohibited them from interfering and said, I have permitted them because this is a house of God, and no man has the right to object to anyone who worships God in a place devoted for the sake of worship. So I can say with no equivocation that it's through this attitude that the Jamaat and Ahmadiyya has established for itself the motto, love for all, hatred for none. Mr. Chairman, in relation to his lifestyle pertaining to justice, the Holy Prophet ﷺ once owed money to a Jew. The Jew thought it was overdue, whereas it was not so. He confronted the Holy Prophet ﷺ and demanded his money using very harsh ways and accused that all Quraysh were bad debtors who never honor their promises. He has not only insulted the Holy Prophet, but also his tribe. Umar radiallahu anhu, who was also there, became extremely annoyed and his hands went to attack. The Holy Prophet stopped Umar, who had now used some abusive words against the Jew and was perhaps about to strike him, and said, Umar, you had behaved differently. First, you should have told me to be mindful to the contract and pay in time. Then you should have told him to be kind in his demand and merciful to his debtors. Then he turned to another of his companions and said, still, there are 3 days. I know the limit is not yet over, but pay him whatever I owe and add some money because of the harsh attitude of Umar radiallahu anhu. This was his behavior when openly insulted in the company of his companions. His sense of justice was supreme. It was absolute, not in any way connected to his personal tribal or religious loyalty. Mr. Chairman, to end my speech, permit me to give the message of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to various kings surrounding the Arab Peninsula, declaring his intention for peace and cooperation. Among these letters included one written in 628 CE to the monks of St. Catherine Monastery in Mount Sinai. In it, he issued a charter of privilege, offering secure protection of fundamental human rights to Christians living in the Muslim Empire. He declares, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we have seen, had even charted out his charter of privilege for the Christians of his time to make sure that they live peacefully. And today we see certain Muslim clerics declaring killing Christians and some other set of Muslims and Hindus and etc. for no rightful reasons. One thing we must note, in every religion, however idolatrous it may appear to us today, was fundamentally a monotheistic religion because God is just one. This is a message from Muhammad, son of Abdullah. As a covenant to those who adopt Christianity near and far, that we are with them. Verily, I, the servant, the helper, and my followers defend them because Christians are my citizens, and by Allah, I hold out against anything that displeases them. No compulsion is to be on them, neither are their judges to be removed from their job, nor their monks from their monasteries. No one is to destroy a house of their religion, to damage it, or to carry anything from it to the Muslims' houses. Should anyone take any of these, he will spoil God's covenant and disobey his prophets. Verily, They are my enemies and have my sincere chatter against all that they hate. No one is to force them to travel or oblige them to fight. The Muslims are to fight for them. Their churches are to be respected. They are neither to be prevented from repairing them, nor the sacredness of their covenants. I promise that any monk or a wayfarer who seek my help on the mountains, in forests, desert or habitation, or in places of worship, I will repel his enemies with my friends and helpers, with all my relatives and with all those who profess to follow me, and will defend them, because they are my covenants. And I will defend the covenanted against the persecution, injury, and embarrassment of their enemies. If they prefer to defend their properties and persons themselves, they will be allowed to do so, and will not be put to any inconvenience on that account. No bishop will be expelled from his bishopric, no monk from his monastery, no priest from his place of worship, and no pilgrim will be detained in his pilgrimage. None of their churches and other places of worship will be desolated or destroyed or demolished. No material of their churches will be used to build mosques or houses for Muslims. Any Muslim doing so will regard as recalcitrant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet. Monks and bishops will be subject to no tax or any means, whether they live in forest or in river, in the east or in the west, in the north or in the south. I give them my words of honor. They are on my promise and covenant, and will enjoy perfect immunity from all sorts of inconvenience. Every help shall be given to them in the repair of their churches. They shall be absolved of wearing arms. No one of the nations of Muslims is to disobey this covenant until the day of judgment. Signed, Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Quoted from Makatibut Rasul, letter of the messenger, printed in Beirut, Lebanon, from Baghdad. Concepts of almost all religions are found to be corrupted today. It is, I guess, actually natural for things to change with time. And this theory applies to religion as well. New concepts keep coming in and are added and accepted and practiced. The misconceptions, the misunderstandings, and confusion in religion today are by all probability a result of this. Man always interprets, misconstrues, and misappropriates divine teachings after the prophets are gone. The prophets were the propagators and disseminators of the same fundamental truth. Their teachings differed in their quality and scope to match their time. Hence, Islam recognized the truth that all these teachers of humanity were God's great messengers, and it was made incumbent upon a Muslim to believe in them as he believed in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In relating to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated in the Holy Quran, Quran chapter 16, verse 37, Surah An-Nahl, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد بعثنا في كل أمة رسولا أن اعبدوا الله واجتنبوا الطاغوت فمنهم من هدى الله ومنهم من حقت عليهم ضلالة فسيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. Translation: And we did raise among every people a messenger preaching, worship Allah and shun the evil one. Then among them were some whom Allah guided, and among them were some who became deserving of ruin. So travel through the earth and see what was the end of those who treated the prophets as liars. Some Christians may look upon Muhammad as an imposter, and some Jews regard Jesus as a false prophet. And some Hindus who believe in the finality of the Vedic revelation may consider Moses as a charlatan. But a Muslim ceases to remain a Muslim the instant he ceases to revere any of them as he revered the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all religions truly revealed by God to His Messenger are fully respected in Islam. This can only bring mankind to harmony, unity, and peace among religions. According to us Muslims, this is the only way to maintain the peace. The feelings and the sentiments of every religion and the people must be respected. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
He's visiting from East Cape. That concludes the formal speeches on behalf of the representative faiths today. And I'd like to thank each and every one of them for sharing with us the particular aspect of the wisdom of their faiths, and we wish them all the very best. We also wish to thank our audience today for coming and spending the time and listening. And I pray and I hope that we can walk away from here having gained something good. What we traditionally do now at the end of the ceremony is that we present our speakers as a token of appreciation with a small gift, as we did the rabbi who. So that will now be done by our national president, who would like to present all the speakers with a gift as a token of appreciation. That concludes the presentation. Now, the final thing before the prayers and the after refreshment is the closing remarks, which was going to be done by our local councillor who didn't make it today. And someone is standing today is Mr. James Elman, who will give us a closing remark. Thank you, James.
Good evening, my dear sisters and brothers, and to our speakers. Thank you for doing a nearly impossible task, because I know that just on one little aspect of the life of any of the founders or the prophets or those who have been guided to give us what we have today can take days. You know, Kirti was saying just before he left that if they have a program to talk about Krishna for 9 days and he has to do 15 minutes. So thank you very much. It was a near impossible task, but you really fed us. The challenge that I want to put out to everyone here is what we have received, let us share it with others. Not just to those who normally come to these kind of gatherings or who agree with us, but to tell somebody else as well that that don't normally come to these kind of gatherings or who don't really who aren't really exposed to these kind of gatherings. I think that's very important. And also that these things that we have received, that we value, that we will make it a reality in our own lives. I think one of the speakers said that our actions should really be the message. You know, St. Francis of Assisi, you know, I like talking about him, also said that our actions should really be the message, and not always words. Maybe also a challenge to the audience. Sometimes it becomes very difficult when the speakers are speaking and we are speaking. I'm also guilty of it. Sometimes I have to say something to somebody next to me. If we can be as silent as possible, or maybe go outside and say that something. Because some people were a little bit loud while the speakers were speaking. You know, and it can be not disturbing only to the speakers, but also to those who are listening. So that challenge, you know, that we also respect that. I think it's very important. But again, to the organizers, the Ahmadiyya community, thank you very much for bringing us together in this way. As Nick has also said, we don't always have a lot of people bringing us together in this way. And we must really value this. So thank you very much for the contribution that you are making in making this happen. So we really appreciate it. And we pray that we will continue with this. Because, again, if we do not continue with this, we are really depriving ourselves and maybe others of this growth that we possibly have in making this peace that comes from the divine possible even sooner. And I just want to see who was at that workshop on Monday. They were talking about making peace possible in our own lifetime. And that is what I'm talking about. That we make peace possible even in our own lifetime. But that's to start with me. So peace and blessings to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've done the vote of thanks now. We will close up with a silent prayer. Litva, our national president.
Yeah, it's a silent prayer.
The silent prayer, and
the prayer is your own way. At the end is Amen and Amen is the same. Please join with me. Amen.
Okay, so now, ladies and gentlemen, the refreshments will be served at the wall at the back so that we can make your way there. The ladies, there is a separate table for ladies who wish to join the ladies, or if they wish, they can also come to that side.
One way.